Welcome back to another video, guys, and today we're going to be talking about how we've been dialing our amp sims wrong the entire time. But before we get into today's topic, if you guys would like for me to mix your music, shoot me an email at divinemotherstudios@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you guys with details of your project. So like many of you, we have our ways of dialing in our amp sims. Now recently I just discovered that we've been lied to and I've been setting up my amp sims wrong for the better part of 6 to 7 years. And I'll get to that in a moment as to why, but first I'd like to thank a few commenters on my previous video that brought this to my attention, and that is going to be a Mr. Deacon and a Mr. Serpent's Bane. You two guys really helped me out here, and I would have never figured that out on my own had I not been left those 2 comments, so I really appreciate it. This video is for you guys. With that out of the way, let me just give you guys a quick backstory so you guys understand where I'm coming from here, right? And I've been playing guitar for almost 2 decades now. With that being said, the common consensus, at least for now, among guitar players and recordists is that when you're recording guitar, you're going to want to give the DAW and your interface a healthy level so that you can have a nice, decent, strong sounding DI for any kind of audio engineering or to send off to a mix engineer. However, it has recently come to light that that is actually incorrect for dialing in amp sims. It may be okay for recording, even though now that I really think about it, I don't think it is anymore. Dialing in for amp sims, it's absolutely the incorrect way of doing it. So let's back up here. Let me just give you a brief explanation of what gain staging is, right? Gain staging is essentially the stages of gain or tiers of gain that you have within your system. So gain stage 1 could be the volume knob on your pickups and on your guitar. Gain stage 2 could be the preamp section on your interface, and then any additional software gain staging that you may do within your DAW, like a trim plugin or the plugin itself, etc. And when it comes to amp sims, that is something that is practically non-applicable. Why is that? If you think about it, if you take a guitar and an amp in real life, there is no secondary gain stage. It's just cable, guitar, and then amp, right? So guitar, cable, amp, boom, that's it. And it's just being fed a consistent level from the guitar itself. There is no preamp. There is no like mix tool or software trim plugin or whatever. It's just guitar, cable, amp. So why does this matter? Well, when we're dialing in our amp tones, if we're diming the input gain like a lot of us are, then we're actually not getting an accurate representation of the amp sims recreations. And that explains a lot as to why a lot of people complain about why they feel like they can't get the proper amp tones that they want out of their amp sims, or why they never feel real, or why they don't sound like the presets, or like they don't sound like the videos they see on YouTube, or in many cases, if they have the real amplifier, why they say it doesn't sound anything close like the real amplifier. So with that being said, what is the actual way to get those accurate representations here? The strategy is essentially to recreate the chain that you would have in real life here. Just the guitar, cable, and your amplifier, right? And the way to basically recreate that is to just lower the input gain all the way down on your interface. And I know that seems counterintuitive. When I brought this up to a friend of mine, he basically said, wouldn't that signal not be strong enough to, in his words, trigger the amp sim? And I basically had to explain to him, like, no, not really. That's actually not the case. And if you notice, a lot of your software amp sims have a input knob basically built into the software that you can bring up the level after the fact. Now you're probably wondering, why wouldn't I just dime it on the interface? Well, if you were to do that, you're basically recreating what a tube screamer is going to be doing, right? A tube screamer, what it does is, or a boost pedal, is going to boost the signal and saturate the front end of your amplifier as it's hitting the preamp stages of the amplifier. So that's why tube screamers are so cool, because that's essentially what it's going to do. It's going to give the front end of the amplifier tons and tons of more gain to be able to run through its system. And that saturates the amp more and gives it a different characteristic. Well, your preamp is essentially doing the same thing on your interface. When you're diming it almost to the point where you're not clipping, but you're still having a very high signal, you're diming the input of the amp sim itself, basically essentially creating the tube screamer effect within software. And that, when I heard that, I was like, oh my god, that makes so much fucking sense. This is why so many people complain that their clean settings or their clean presets always sound kind of dirty, or why the heavy gain presets that they have on their amp sims always sound a little bit too crazy or unyielding and just too much for them to handle, or why a lot of people just complain about the tone itself across the board on their amp sims, and why they're wondering why it doesn't sound like their actual amplifiers. Is essentially, you got a pseudo tube screamer in front of all of our amp sims. I couldn't believe it. I don't know why plugin manufacturers never really talked about this, why they just kind of tell us to, oh yeah, just turn it up and then, whatever. and just kind of leave it at that. They kind of give us bad advice. Even in their manuals, they tell you to turn it up to -6 dB, do a couple palm mutes, and then like set the input gain or whatever. It's really crazy. All right, so what do we get if we were to bypass this effect? Well, essentially what we would get is a greater accuracy of our amp sims. Our amp sims would actually respond how we would want them to. By eliminating that effect that our preamps are doing on our interfaces to the amp sims, we're actually using the amp sims in the way the manufacturer intended. And therefore, we're gonna get a much more accurate representation of the simulation that they're presenting. Okay, so here are the steps to get a much more clear and accurate representation of our amp sims. We're gonna set the interface gain all the way down to 0, and then we're gonna adjust the input on the plugin itself depending on the interface's output level. I know, just bear with me here. What you're going to want to do to find that level is go to the manual on your interfaces, and you're going to find a section called maximum output level or input level, right? For me, it was plus 15 dB. That was what the manual said on my interface. Other interfaces, I think like Focusrite are plus 10. Don't quote me on that. Check the manual. And then what you're going to do is you're going to go to Ed S's Google Sheet, which I have linked in the description below. And then you're going to reference that sheet for the appropriate level to set on the input gain on the plugin. Again, the plugin, not your interface. And every plugin manufacturer is different, but Ed S has taken the liberty of checking each one and reaching out to these guys and doing the legwork for us and creating this Google Sheet so that we can know what that input is. Now, for those who don't find what the input gain settings are for your particular interface is on the Google Sheet, what you're going to want to do is, again, check the manual. My interface, unfortunately, wasn't on the Google Sheet, but I checked the manual, and I saw that it was plus 15 dB. On the Google Sheet, it had another PreSonus interface called the 24C, and I saw that it was plus 10. So mine was about plus 5 dB greater. Now, I don't want to get too sciencey here, and it took me a while to understand why this is, but all you need to know is that let's say the closest thing to the interface that you have on the Google Sheet says plus 10. What you're going to want to do is take the value for whatever plus 10 is on the Google Sheet. So like if for neural DSP plugins, it says minus -2. For an interface that shoots plus 10 dB, since your interface says plus 12 dB, you're going to increase the input gain to 0 on the neural DSP. So if it's greater, you add. If it's less, you remove. And that has to do with headroom and essentially dynamic range and all that and all the sciencey stuff. I don't want to bore you guys with all that stuff. But again, just to be clear, if your interface has a greater value than what's listed on the Google Sheet, you're going to add that same amount to the input gain on the amp sim, right? So again, if your amp sim says 10 plus and then it says for neural DSP plugins it says plus 2, but your interface says plus 12, then you're going to take that -2 and add 2 to that, right? So that's going to end up being 0. I hope that makes sense. It took me a while to figure out that because my interface wasn't listed there, and I really hope that is useful for you guys. So now I'm going to demonstrate exactly what I'm doing here on how to go about checking this so that it's a little bit more clear for you guys so that we can go ahead and actually set up the amp sims in the correct way. Okay guys, so I am in my DAW currently here, and let me show you guys exactly how I would go about setting up my amp sims now that I know what we know. So quickly, let me just show you what my interface looks like here. As you can see, I very clearly have the input gain all the way down, and it looks like this on the meter. Super, super, super low. But on the DAW, the meter should give you a bit more of an accurate representation here. So, you know, around -28 or something like that. You guys are probably wondering like, holy shit, that is fucking super low, right? Well, check it out. So let's reference the Google Sheet by the wonderful Ed S. I have a PreSonus 1810C. The closest thing I have here is a PreSonus Studio 24C. Now, I already referenced the manual, like I mentioned earlier, and mine, instead of 10, says 15. And again, I'll just say it honestly, the higher the value, the more headroom, right? So essentially, the floor is going to be lower and the ceiling is going to be higher. That's the best way I could describe it to you guys. So if your interface says like plus 12, like it would be here on the UAD Volt 1, you guys got 2.5 dBu more headroom than somebody that would have the PreSonus 24C. As for myself, I have plus 15, so then I would have plus 5 dB extra headroom available to me on my own interface. And that causes you to want to increase the values that you see here in each individual respective plugin manufacturer. So I'll give you an example of that. As you can see here, it says for an interface that's plus 10, you want to use plus 4.8 on the software. But if you go here to the UAD, and which is 12.5, you're going to get 7.3. Again, hope that makes sense. That has to do with headroom and dynamic range, right? So the greater the dynamic range, the more you're going to have to boost the input on the software. Okay, that out of the way. For STL, it says 4.8, right? So if I add 5 to that, that's 9.8 for me because I have, again, plus 15. So I'm going to just pop this guy up to 9 point. Come on. All right, fuck it, whatever. 10 dB, same shit, I guess. For the purposes of this video, it's not that big a deal. All right, so I have brought up the prescribed amount of input gain on the software while still leaving the input gain on my interface very low. Now let's take a listen to what the plugin sounds like. Let's go ahead and just try a random preset. I don't know, fuck it, let's do this one. So, you know, your initial inclination might be, wow, there is no input gain happening on the hardware side on his interface, and yet I am still getting a fantastic sounding preset. And once I started doing this, guys, this is where I noticed that all the fucking presets here actually started working to the actual degree that they were intended. Let's try another one. That sounds great. And it sounded great before. I still think that STL has the best high gain tones in the business, but they sound even better to my ears now. The first time I started messing with this, I kind of did incorrectly, so I came to the conclusion that it may not be something that you have to worry about. But now that I really understand the concept and started messing with it, yes, my plugins are feeling a lot better and sounding a lot better as well. Now, let me just set this to 0. And let me just bring up the gain on my interface to show you guys exactly what's happening here. So I have now brought the gain up on my interface. You can go ahead and check out the meter here. And let's see what the amp sounds now that I have the input gain on my interface up. That is insane. It sounds more woofy, a lot more saturated. Again, we're mimicking that tube screamer effect there, but since the tube screamer rolls off low end and the preamp doesn't, we're getting all that extra low end and all the extra stuff that we don't want going into the front of the amp sim. Now, if that's something you guys are cool with, there's no right or wrong way to do it. You know, if that's the sound that you're going for, cool, whatever. You know, got to do what you got to do to get the sound you want. But if you guys are going for accuracy and you want to get the best out of your amp sims in terms of what they represent, lowering that input gain and then bringing up the input gain on the plugin itself is going to go a much better way for you to do that. So I just lowered again my input gain on my interface and brought it up on the software. For me, the low end, it just sounds a lot more clear, more punchy. The high end has a bit more of that sizzle, and it's just a bit more clarity going on in this way than I had when I had the input gain all the way up. Okay, let me give you another example here. Let's go ahead and try the Nolly plugin. So I've got my Nolly plugin here. Let's go ahead and reference the Google Sheet for Neural DSP. So I have a Personas here. So plus 10 minus 2. Okay, so minus 2. That means I would need to bring this up past the 0 point. So I am terrible at math, so forgive me for that. So let me just quickly calculate that. And it's 2.2 plus 5. So 2.8 would be the input that I put on the Nolly plugin. Again, if you guys got lost as to why I did that, my interface has plus 15 dB. And I need to add 5 since I have 5 more than this interface to the Neural DSP. So 2.8, if I remember correctly. 2.7, whatever. Now let's take a listen to what that sounds like. Sounds pretty good. Let's turn on the tube screamer, bring that down. You know what's funny is the one that has the biggest difference is going to be the Neural DSP one. I just noticed that it sounds a lot more clear. I always felt that Neural DSP was great, but they had a bit of mud going on in the lower mids. It's always was lower mids, but I realize why that is now, and that's because I was adding those lower mids with the preamp stage on my interface from all of the pickup stuff that's in there. Now that I basically have eliminated that secondary stage of gain and only relying on what's happening here, and it sounds great. It sounded great before, but to me, it sounds a lot more clear. It's even responding a lot better when I do those palm mutes. It's giving me that kind of a percussive attack that I get from my real amplifier, my PV Invective over there. I think I'm going to start setting up my amp sims like this from now on. When it comes to mixing, you know, it's going to be really hard to do that as well as I can, because if someone sends me the DI guitar tracks, it's going to be a little bit difficult to recreate that if I'm not recording them myself. I'll have to figure out a way to do that when I'm mixing people just sending me DI stuff. But other than that, for my own personal music and stuff that I'm going to be doing on my own, and this is going to be the shit. This is fucking dope. Guitar tones are going to sound great on all my new records and stuff like that. So I'm really excited. I hope you guys got some value out of it. I hope I made some sense for you guys. This is a topic that is completely new to me, but I spent practically 6 hours yesterday diving into this because it's like, how the fuck do we not know this shit, right? I mean, it makes so much sense when you guys think about it. Like guitar, cable, amp, that's it. And then by taking these steps, we're essentially recreating the real world here. And that's what we want. We buy these products because we want to recreate the real world in a digital format. But if we're not doing it the correct way, we're not going to get anywhere near close to that. And by doing it this way, I think we get much more close representation of the real world. And that is exactly why we buy these products. So that said, I will leave you with that, guys. I love you guys very much. And I'll see you guys